Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some countries seem more peaceful and cooperative than others? Or why some societies struggle more with conflict and disunity? Today, we're diving into a fascinating study that uses a new way to measure cultural differences within countries to see if these differences can predict big societal problems. The big question this research tackles is this: do big cultural differences inside a country make it harder for people to get along, cooperate, and have stable societies? Think about it, modern countries are made up of tons of different people who need to work together to pay taxes, follow laws, and build a shared future. If these people have vastly different beliefs, values, and ways of seeing the world, could that create problems? Scientists used a huge data set called the World Values Survey, with information from over 260,000 people in 95 countries. They developed a special tool called the Cultural Fixation Index, or CFST for short. This CFST tool measures how different groups of people within a country are culturally. They looked at differences between people based on where they live geographically, their ethnicity, their religion, their education level, and their social class. Then they compared these cultural differences to things like how strong a country's democracy is, how much corruption there is, how easy it is for people to move up socially, and whether there is a risk of civil conflict. Now, the CFST is pretty cool. Imagine you have data like attitudes, beliefs, and preferences from lots of people. CFST looks at these responses not just as individual opinions, but as cultural traits. It then measures how much of the overall difference in these traits across the whole country is due to the differences between specific groups you've defined. It is like asking, are people in this region really different in their values compared to people in other regions, or is everyone just a bit different from everyone else? A high CFST score between two groups means they have significantly different cultural values. Before the study, scientists often looked at how ethnically diverse a country was, basically how many different ethnic groups lived there. Some studies found that more diverse countries had more problems, like worse government, more instability, more corruption, and even more civil conflict. But it wasn't always clear-cut. Other studies found no such link, or even the opposite. This made researchers wonder if it is just the presence of different groups that matters or if it's something else. This is where the CFST really shines. It doesn't just count groups, it measures the actual cultural distance between them. So, you could have many ethnic groups, but if they mostly share similar values, the CFST would show little distance. Conversely, you might have fewer groups, but if their values are wildly different, the CFST would be high. This is a more nuanced way to look at cultural differences. The researchers really wanted to be sure their findings were solid. So they used something called a multiverse analysis. This sounds a bit like science fiction, but in research it means they tested their main idea using tons of different statistical models and slightly different ways of looking at the data. This helps make sure the results aren't just a fluke caused by one specific way of analyzing things. They registered their plan, meaning they decided before seeing the full results how they would analyze the data, which adds a lot of credibility. So, what did they find after all that number crunching? It turns out there was one pattern that was incredibly consistent. The biggest predictor of negative societal outcomes was a large cultural distance between people living in different geographic regions within a country. When people in different parts of the same country had very different values and beliefs, that country was consistently more likely to have higher corruption, weaker democracy. Lower social mobility, meaning it is harder for people to improve their life circumstances, and a higher risk of civil conflict or war. This finding was super robust. Even when they included a bunch of other factors like a country's wealth, education levels, and geography, the link between regional cultural distance and these problems stayed strong. It seems something about people being culturally different and geographically separated is a real red flag for national stability. Now, this is where things get really interesting and counterintuitive. The researchers hypothesized that all kinds of cultural divisions would lead to bad outcomes. But when they looked at cultural differences based on education level, they found pretty much the opposite. Countries where highly educated people and less educated people had very different cultural values actually tended to have better outcomes like more democracy and less corruption. This effect was even non-linear, meaning the most positive outcomes were seen when there were huge differences between these education groups. This was a surprise. It suggests that not all cultural divides are created equal, and maybe some differences, like those driven by education, can even be beneficial. What about ethnic or religious differences? The study found that cultural distances between ethnic groups were generally not associated with weaker democracies or more corruption. However, they did find a link between ethnic cultural distances and a greater likelihood of interstate war. Cultural distances between religious groups also didn't show a consistent link to negative outcomes like weak democracy or corruption. This challenges some previous assumptions. While ethnic and religious differences can be very salient and sometimes lead to conflict, this study found that the cultural values associated with these differences on their own didn't consistently predict these larger societal problems. So, the big takeaway is that it is not just any cultural diversity that is problematic. The study strongly suggests that geographically segregated cultural differences are the ones that tend to cause trouble. The idea is that when groups are separated geographically, they have fewer opportunities to interact, understand each other, and forge shared norms and values needed for cooperation. Over time, these regional differences can solidify, leading to divergent interests and potential conflict. Think about it like this. If you live in the same town and interact with people from different backgrounds every day, you learn to navigate those differences. You might develop a common dialect of understanding or norms of tolerance. But if culturally distinct groups live in separate regions with little everyday contact, it is much easier for grievances to fester and for groups to feel like they have little in common with people in other parts of the country. This geographic isolation can make it easier for political movements to mobilize based on local grievances, potentially at the expense of national unity. The fact that ethnic and religious cultural distances didn't consistently predict negative outcomes is quite striking. While these identities can be a source of conflict, the study suggests that the underlying cultural values associated with them aren't inherently destabilizing. Perhaps conflict arises more when these identities intersect with other factors like resource scarcity, inequality, or political grievances rather than from the cultural differences themselves. In a nutshell, this research uses a sophisticated new measure to show that what seems to matter most for societal stability isn't just the presence of diverse groups, but whether those culturally distinct groups are geographically segregated. That segregation seems to hinder the necessary cooperation and coordination for a healthy, functioning nation. The study provides a powerful new tool and a clear, robust finding. Geographically fragmented cultures are linked to a host of negative societal outcomes, while other forms of cultural diversity, even along strong identity lines like ethnicity and religion, are often benign. Now, a quick word on how they did this. They used a massive survey, asked people a bunch of questions about their beliefs and values, and then used that CFST measure to quantify the cultural gap between different groups within each country. They looked at regional differences, education differences, ethnic differences, income differences, and religious differences. Then, they compared these cultural distances to well-established measures of democracy, corruption, inequality, social mobility, and conflict for each country. And importantly, they ran all these analyses many different ways, a multiverse analysis, to make sure their main finding was truly solid and not just an artifact of one specific analytical choice. They used a really wide range of outcome variables. For democracy, they used 3 different established indexes. For corruption, they used the Corruption Perceptions Index. For conflict, they looked at both intrastate war and lower intensity conflict. For inequality, they used the Gini coefficient. And for social mobility, they looked at intergenerational persistence. This comprehensive approach strengthens the conclusions. They were also very careful to control for other factors that could explain these relationships, such as GDP per capita, average education, population size, geographical features like mountainousness, and even things like legal origin and genetic diversity. Even after accounting for all these other potential influences, the link between regional cultural distance and societal problems remain. The implications are pretty immense. If geographic segregation is the key, it suggests that policies aimed at fostering interaction between people in different regions could be crucial for national unity and stability. It also means that simply having diverse ethnic or religious groups isn't the problem. It is where those groups live and how much they interact that seems to be the critical factor. The finding about education is particularly intriguing, suggesting that the cultural differences between highly educated and less educated populations might actually be linked to positive societal development. Overall, this study gives us a much clearer picture of what kind of cultural diversity is associated with societal problems. It elegantly shows that the issue isn't diversity itself, but the fracturing of cultures along regional lines, which hinders the essential cooperation and coordination that underpin stable and well-functioning nations. It is a powerful reminder that how we organize ourselves geographically has profound implications for how we live together. So, what is my take on this? This is a really strong study, using a novel measure and a rigorous analytical approach. The multiverse analysis is a big plus for confidence in the findings. The main takeaway about geographically segregated culture is compelling and offers a new lens through which to view societal conflict. One limitation, as the authors acknowledge, is that correlation doesn't equal causation. While regional cultural distance is linked to conflict, we can't definitively say it causes it. There might be other underlying factors driving both the cultural divides and the conflict. Also, the data is cross-sectional, meaning it is a snapshot in time. Longitudinal studies that track cultural changes and societal outcomes over years would be valuable to understand the dynamics better. But the implications are huge for policymakers. It suggests focusing on initiatives that promote interaction and understanding across regions within a country. For us as individuals, it might encourage us to be more aware of how our own geographic location shapes our cultural outlook and how important it is to connect with people beyond our immediate surroundings. Future research could delve into why regional differences are so impactful, perhaps by looking at specific cultural traits, historical factors, or political structures that emerge in geographically isolated communities. What do you all think about these findings? Does the idea of geographically segregated culture making conflict more likely resonate with you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab for more science distilled, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of psychology and human behavior. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.